How do you explain to two 8-year-old twins that the father they pray for every single night, the man whose crumpled photo their son carries in his jacket pocket, like a soldier carries a dog tag, the angel their daughter draws with golden wings in every single school assignment, isn't actually watching over them from heaven, but is sitting 10 feet away in a 3-piece suit that costs more than their mother makes in a year, cutting into a $40 steak with a silver knife while his bodyguards stand at the door, laughing with a woman who isn't their mother and bouncing a little boy on his knee, a little boy who calls him daddy, without knowing that word belongs to 2 other children who've been starving for it their whole lives. For Mira Donovan, the lie she'd carried for 8 brutal years wasn't a deception. It was a tourniquet wrapped around a wound that never stopped bleeding, because telling Lily and Noah that their father didn't die in a car crash, that he simply looked at a positive pregnancy test, looked at the woman carrying his twins, and chose to vanish into the underworld of Chicago's most ruthless crime empire rather than hold his own children, well, that truth would have killed something inside them that Mira had fought every double shift, every eviction notice, every night sleeping in a broken-down Honda Civic with 2 newborns in a Chicago winter to keep alive. But fate has a sick sense of humor, and it doesn't care how many walls you've built or how many lies you've stitched together with bleeding fingers. Because on a Sunday afternoon in September, the angel daddy came down from heaven, except he didn't come with wings. He came in a black Escalade with tinted windows, walked into the same Italian restaurant where he once told a 19-year-old girl he'd love her forever, sat at the VIP table by the window, and ordered a whiskey, never knowing that the 2 children he'd convinced himself didn't exist were playing just 30 feet away, about to recognize the face they'd kissed goodnight in a photograph every single evening for 8 years. And what happened next didn't just crack the armor of one of Chicago's most feared men, it detonated a chain of secrets, betrayals, and buried sins that would drag 2 worlds, one of survival and one of power, into a collision so violent that by the end, someone wouldn't walk away alive. If this story already has your heart pounding, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because in this story, the most dangerous thing isn't the mafia, it's the truth. Mira was sitting at a small table in the corner, her finger sliding over a menu page she already knew she could only afford 2 pasta plates for the kids and a glass of water for herself, when she realized Lily wasn't running around anymore. The little girl had gone still in the restaurant's tiny play area, the ragdoll Mira had stitched from scrap cloth at the factory dropping to the floor, her wide eyes locked on the VIP table by the large window where September afternoon sunlight poured across the black suit of a man laughing with a little boy on his lap. Noah noticed what his sister was staring at. He didn't ask. He didn't speak. He just slipped his hand into his jacket pocket, where he always kept the crumpled photograph he carried every day like a vow. Then he lifted it up to eye level, held it beside the man's face at the VIP table, and in that instant everything Mira had built for 8 years began to collapse, because Noah's eyes widened slowly, from doubt to certainty, from certainty to trembling, and before Mira could stand, before she could scream, the 2 children tore through the rows of tables like 2 tiny bullets, fired straight into the heart of the past. Lily ran faster, her little feet clipping chair legs, knocking over a water glass on someone's table, slipping past the arm of a bodyguard reaching for her but missing, and she crashed straight into Jace Valetti's legs, her small arms wrapping around the leg of his suit pants, as if letting go would make an angel fly away again. And her crying rang through the elegant restaurant like a shattered bell in the middle of a concert. "Daddy, you came back from heaven. You came for our birthday, didn't you? I knew it. I knew you'd come. I drew you every day so you wouldn't forget our faces." Brody tumbled off Jace's lap from the shock, the 5-year-old landing on the floor and staring up at the 2 strange children clinging to his dad, crying, not understanding what was happening. Celeste set her wine down, her eyes narrowing, but the one who truly froze was Jace. The whiskey glass in his hand trembled, then slipped, then fell, striking the marble tabletop and shattering into small pieces as silence spread across the restaurant like an oil slick. He looked down and saw Lily's eyes exactly like his, the same color, the same shape, the same tiny spray of freckles beneath the left eye he saw every morning in the mirror. And just behind Lily stood Noah, not hugging, not crying, his hands clenched into fists, the crumpled photo pinched between pale fingers, and the 8-year-old stared straight into the eyes of the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago and said in a voice that shook but never softened, Angels don't eat steak. Celeste leaned toward Jace, her voice low and sharp as a blade. Jace, who are these children? What are they talking about? And Jace Valetti, the man who had stared into gun barrels without blinking, the man who had built an empire from blood and ashes, did what he was best at. He lied, his voice rough, his eyes refusing to look down. I don't know them. They must have me confused with someone else. Lily tipped her face up, tears soaking into the $10,000 suit pants. But Daddy, it's me. It's Lily. Look at my face. Mommy says I have your eyes. Don't you remember? And that was when Mira arrived. She didn't run. She walked, each step heavy as lead, moving through the stare of dozens of diners watching in silence, moving through the scent of expensive food she couldn't afford to buy, moving through 8 years of lies splintering under her feet like glass. She placed her hand on Lily and Noah's shoulders, gentle but immovable. Lily, Noah, we're leaving. Now. No, Mommy. It's him. It's Daddy. Look at the picture. It's the same face, Lily sobbed, her fingers gripping the fabric of Jace's pants so tightly that pulling them free would leave creases that would never fully disappear. Mira knelt, pried Lily's tiny fingers off Jace's leg one by one. And as she did, her eyes met his for a single second. But in that second she saw everything. The fear, the shame, and worse than all of it, recognition. He knew. He knew it was his child. And he still chose to say, I don't know them. Mira hoisted Lily onto one hip, took Noah's hand with the other, turned her back, and walked away. Noah made it 3 steps, then stopped, turned, looked at Jace one last time, his 8-year-old face older than his age, harder than his age, aching beyond his age, and he said loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear, Mom told us you were an angel watching over us. I prayed for you every night. I wish you were dead for real. No one in the restaurant moved. Jace's 2 bodyguards stood rigid, not knowing what they were supposed to protect their boss from, because there wasn't a bullet in the world faster than the words of a child who had just lost the last thing he still believed in. The parking garage beneath the restaurant was cold as a tomb, the fluorescent lights flickering and laying a sickly yellow sheen over rows of glossy black cars lined up like coffins, an Escalade, a Mercedes, a Bentley, and among all of it, Mira's 2009 Honda Civic parked in the farthest corner, like an apology for existing in the wrong place. Mira opened the back door, her hands shaking so badly she had to try twice before she managed to buckle Lily in, the little girl still crying without sound, tears sliding down onto the scrap cloth hair clip. Mira had stayed up until 2 o'clock in the morning to stitch for her to wear on her birthday. And beside her, Noah sat still as stone, eyes fixed straight ahead, both fists still clenched on his thighs, the crumpled photo no longer in his hand, because he had left it on the restaurant floor, among the shards of the shattered whiskey glass, as if he'd decided to leave his father behind, in the exact place his father had left him. Mira had barely shut the car door when footsteps rang through the garage, fast, urgent, not the measured tread of a bodyguard, but the footsteps of a man running for the first time in years because he'd always had other people run for him. And when she turned, Jace was there, alone, no Flynn, no security, no armor at all except the 3-piece suit now creased at the knee, where Lily had clung and stained with a dark spread of tears down the pant leg. Mira, wait, please, what the hell just happened up there? I can't just what? Mira snapped around and her voice cracked through the concrete like a gunshot. Not loud but sharp enough to bounce off every wall. I can't just show up. I wasn't planning to, Jace. I was trying to give my children one birthday dinner in 8 years that didn't come from a microwave. And you were sitting there, 10 feet away, playing daddy with someone else's kid while yours have been eating cereal for dinner 3 nights a week, because I can't afford groceries after rent. Jace opened his mouth, but Mira didn't let him speak. 8 years of silence had built into a dam and now it broke. You want to know what happened after you disappeared? They were born at 30 weeks, Jace. 30. Noah came out not breathing. They put him in a box with tubes and wires and I stood outside the NICU glass for 4 minutes. 4 minutes that felt like 4 years, begging God to make his lungs work, because I couldn't lose him too, after I'd already lost you. And where were you? Where were you when I signed the hospital paperwork alone and put father deceased, because that was easier than writing father didn't want us? Where were you when I got evicted the first time, with 2 3-month-old babies, and slept in this exact car, this car right here, In January, in Chicago, with the heat running until the gas ran out, and then I just held them against my chest and prayed the sun would come up before the cold got in. Where were you when the second eviction happened? And I begged the landlord on my knees, literally on my knees. Jace, while Lily cried in the stroller and Noah had a fever of 103, and I had $19 in my bank account. You were building an empire. That's where you were. Jace stood there, his back against a concrete pillar, and for the first time in 8 years of ruling, the Chicago boss looked like his real self, a 28-year-old who'd run, and now a 36-year-old realizing he hadn't run far enough. Mira, I thought you didn't keep. He didn't get to finish. Mira stepped closer, and even though she was almost a head shorter than him, even though he could have bought this whole building and hired an army, she looked up at him with eyes so dry there wasn't a single tear left, because she'd cried them all out a long time ago. You thought I didn't keep them. They're 8 years old. They're in that car right now. They have your eyes, your jaw, your goddamn freckle under the left eye. And 20 minutes ago, they found out the angel they've been praying to every night is alive, eating steak, and doesn't know their names. So don't you dare stand there and tell me what you thought. She turned, opened the driver's door, got in, started the engine, and the Honda Civic squealed its tires on the concrete floor, the scream of old rubber echoing through the million-dollar cars like a shout Mira had held back for 8 years. Jace was left standing alone in the garage, the smell of burned rubber and gasoline mixing in the air, his hands hanging loose, and for the first time, he understood that in all the wars he'd won, the only war that mattered was the one he'd run from. Upstairs, by the elevator doors, Celeste stood in front of a small security camera monitor. The restaurant staff had switched on at her request, because she'd said she was worried about her husband, and she watched the entire exchange in the garage from beginning to end, from Mira's breaking voice, to the collapse on Jace's face. And on Celeste Harmon's lips there wasn't the smile of a betrayed wife. There weren't tears from a woman who'd just learned her husband had children. There was a thin, cold, unhurried smile, the kind of smile of someone who'd found exactly what she'd been hunting for during 6 years undercover, the perfect crack to destroy Jace Valetti from the inside. The black Rolls-Royce glided through Chicago's streets in silence, the kind of silence heavier than any gunshot Jace had ever heard. Brody was asleep in the back seat, his small head resting on the Lamborghini model plane Jace had bought him this afternoon, and Celeste sat in the passenger seat with her gaze turned toward the window, both hands laid on her thighs, calm in a way that felt unnatural. No crying, no yelling, no rapid-fire questions like any wife would have asked after watching 2 strange children call her husband Dad. She just sat there, and that quiet should have scared Jace more than any interrogation ever could, but he was too busy shaking, his hands clamped around the steering wheel until his palms went white, his mind spinning between Lily's eyes, looking up from his pant leg, and Noah's voice echoing in the parking garage. And then Celeste spoke, only a single sentence, her voice low and flat as a lake before a storm. Jace, is there anything you need to tell me? Jace didn't turn his head, his eyes fixed on the road, and he lied in the voice he'd used his whole life to lie, steady, certain, without a crack. It's nothing, Cel. Some woman running a scam. Happens all the time when you have money. My lawyers will handle it. Celeste nodded, just once, slow and slight, then turned back to the window. And she didn't ask another question. She didn't ask why those children had the same faint freckle under the left eye as Jace. She didn't ask why the woman in the garage knew him from 8 years ago. She didn't ask anything a normal wife would have asked. And that silence, that acceptance that was too fast, too clean, too perfect, was the most frightening thing in the car tonight. But Jace didn't notice, because he was too busy seeing his children's faces every time he blinked. 14 miles away, in the studio apartment on the south side, where the walls were so thin you could hear the neighbors coughing at night, Mira shut the door with her back and leaned into it, her legs unable to hold her anymore, and she slid down to the floor, sitting in the middle of old shoes and the worn handbag she'd carried for 8 years, the only shoes and the only bag she had. On the small kitchen table, the 8-year-old birthday cake was still there, the cheap frosting already starting to melt in an apartment with no air conditioning, 8 candles that had never been lit. Happy birthday, Lily and Noah, written in Mira's trembling hand at 4 a.m. after she'd clocked out from the night shift at the sewing factory. And the cake looked like her life now, something prepared with everything she had and still not enough. Still melting. Still, with no one there in time to blow out the candles. Lily sat on the old rug in the living room, clutching Jace's photo she'd managed to retrieve from the restaurant floor because she'd run back to grab it while Mira was pulling Noah toward the door, and she pressed the picture to her chest, the way a child holds a stuffed animal, tears falling onto the wrinkled face, and she asked in the smallest voice an 8-year-old could make, "Mommy, are we not good enough for heaven? Is that why the angel didn't want to hug us back? Did we do something wrong?" Mira bit down on her lip until she tasted blood. She didn't know what to say. For 8 years, she'd had an answer for every question the kids asked. Why Dad didn't come home, why Dad didn't call, why there weren't any family photos on the wall. But this question, are we not good enough? She had no answer, because she'd been asking it herself for 8 years, and she'd never found one. Noah rose from the corner where he'd been sitting silently since they got home, walked to his sister, gently took the photo from Lily's hands, and she sobbed harder, thinking her brother was stealing Dad. But Noah didn't look at the picture. He'd looked at it enough. 8 years of staring at that face every night before sleep was enough. He walked into the tiny bedroom the two siblings shared, closed the door, and then Mira heard it. The sound of paper tearing. Slow, deliberate, not ripped in anger, but torn with the decision of an 8-year-old who'd finally understood angels weren't real, that Dad hadn't died in an accident, that the photo he kissed every night was only the face of a man who'd chosen to eat steak 10 steps away instead of holding his own children. Lily screamed when she heard the tearing, ran into the room, and Mira ran after her, seeing Noah standing in the middle of the bedroom with 2 halves of the photo in his hands, his face dry without a single tear, and Lily snatched the pieces, trying to press them back together, her tiny shaking fingers forcing the halves into place as if she pushed hard enough, Daddy would be whole again. Mira dropped to her knees, pulled both children into her arms, Lily still clutching the torn pieces, Noah still rigid with his hands hanging loose, and Mira did the one thing she'd sworn she'd never do. She cried, not quietly in the bathroom at 2 a.m. like she always had, not into a pillow after the kids fell asleep, but in front of them, out loud, the sobs of a woman who finally didn't have the strength left to pretend she was strong, and the 3 of them sat on the floor of the cramped bedroom beside the birthday cake no one had blown out. In an apartment where the walls were so thin the neighbors could definitely hear them, but no one knocked to check, because on the south side, people learn not to ask. 3 days after that Sunday afternoon in the restaurant, Jace sat in the office on the highest floor of a building he owned under a false name in the Loop. The room dark because he hadn't turned on the lights, with only the glow of Chicago's streets coming through the wide glass windows and painting long streaks across the oak floor, and Flynn Corsaro stood in front of him holding a thick brown envelope, his face cold as always, but his shoulders slightly tight, the kind of tightness of a man about to say something he knows will change everything. "Tell me everything," Jace said, his voice flat, his eyes never leaving the darkness beyond the window. Flynn set the envelope on the desk but didn't open it. He stood still for a moment, and in 18 years as the right hand of the Valetti family, this was the first time Flynn had to choose between truth and loyalty. And in the end, he chose truth, because after that Sunday night, loyalty wasn't a good enough reason to keep a secret anymore. "I knew, boss. I've known for almost 8 years. Jace turned his chair slowly, dangerously, the kind of slow that everyone in the organization knew was the sign of a storm. "What did you just say to me?" Flynn didn't step back, didn't look down. "When you staged the accident and disappeared, I was the one who cleaned up after you. I was supposed to make sure she moved on, but she didn't move on, Jace. She went to Cook County Hospital at 30 weeks, alone, and had twins, a boy and a girl. I found out 3 days after they were born. The boy almost didn't make it. 4 minutes with no oxygen before the doctors got his lungs started." Jace didn't speak. The silence in the room thickened like cement. "I kept it from you because I thought that's what you wanted. You said make the problem go away. I thought you didn't want to know. You thought," Jace repeated the 2 words, and his voice wasn't anger, worse than anger. It was the hollow voice of a man realizing the biggest mistake of his life had been fed and protected by the person he trusted most. Flynn opened the envelope, spread the files across the desk, and Jace looked down, and what he saw in the dim window light was more brutal than anything he'd ever witnessed on the street. Photos of the public school where Lily and Noah were enrolled, an old brick building on the south side with rusted iron fencing, a cracked playground, the kind of school he'd never let Brody set foot in, the kind meant for children the city had forgotten. Medical records from Cook County Hospital. 8 years ago, Mira Donovan, 19 years old, admitted emergently at week 30. Twins delivered. Male infant not breathing for 4 minutes after birth. Ventilated for 2 weeks. In the NICU for 6 weeks. Female infant severely underweight, both in incubators and on every document, every form, every report. There was only one signature. Mira Donovan, no one else, no father, no mother, no relatives, signing everything alone at 19, while her 2 babies lay inside glass boxes, threaded with tubes and wires. Hospital bills, still not fully paid. 8 years of monthly payments. The remaining balance still higher than 6 months of Mira's wages. And beneath that, a housing history. Evicted from her first apartment when the babies were 3 months old for failure to pay rent. Evicted a second time when the children were 2 for nighttime noise complaints, because the kids cried, then moved through 7 different addresses in 6 years, each one worse than the last, until the current studio on the south side. $350 a month, thin walls, no air conditioning, no heater that truly worked. Mira's work schedule. Morning shift at a laundromat from 6 o'clock to 2 o'clock. Afternoon and night shift at an industrial sewing factory from 3 o'clock to 11 o'clock. 6 days a week, Sundays off. Income of $2,000 a month before taxes. And Jace flipped to the last page, the school enrollment form for Lily and Noah Donovan. And he read every line until his eyes stopped on a small box. The box every child in America has on their enrollment paperwork. Father's name, and in that box, in Mira's handwriting. The handwriting he still recognized after 8 years, because she used to write him love notes on napkins at the laundromat. There was only one word: deceased. Jace slammed the file shut. The sound cracked through the dark office like a coffin lid. He set both hands on the desk, and those hands, the hands that had first squeezed a trigger at 22, the hands that had signed orders to erase traitors, the hands that had built the Valetti Empire from ashes after his father's death, hands that had never shaken in front of anyone or anything, were shaking now, shaking so hard he had to press them into the wood to make them stop. But they didn't stop. Flynn stood watching, and after a silence so long they could both hear an ambulance siren somewhere below on the street, he asked, "What do you want to do, boss?" Jace didn't look up, his eyes still pinned to the closed file. To the word deceased he could still see through the cover. "I want to fix it." Flynn looked at Jace, and in the eyes of the most loyal second-in-command in Chicago, there was something no one in the organization had ever seen. Pity. Not for Mira, not for the kids, but for his boss, for the man sitting inside the most powerful empire in the city, without the strength to lift his head. Some things can't be fixed, Jace. They can only be carried. Jace started the only way he knew, with money, because money was the language he'd used for 10 years to solve every problem, to buy loyalty, to erase mistakes, to make things feel easier without ever truly changing anything. And on Tuesday morning after that Sunday afternoon in the restaurant, a plain white envelope with no return name appeared beneath the door of Mira's studio apartment on the south side, and inside were $20,000 in cash, stacked neatly, and a small slip of paper with only 4 words: "For the kids." That afternoon, the envelope came back to Jace's desk on the highest floor of the building in the Loop, mailed through regular post with a 45-cent stamp, and inside the money was untouched. Not a bill missing, but Jace's note had been flipped over. And on the back, Mira had written in the same handwriting Jace had seen in the box, marked "Father deceased" a few nights earlier. They needed a father, not a check. Don't contact us again. Jace stared at those words for a long time, and for the first time in his life he realized money wasn't a language. Money was just noise, and Mira had lived in silence too long to be bought by noise. But Jace didn't stop, because stopping wasn't in the nature of the man who'd built an empire from ashes after his father's death. And if she wouldn't take money, then he'd protect her in ways she wouldn't know, in ways no one would know, in ways only Jace Valetti could. Over the next week, 4 members of a small gang that shook people down around Mira's block on the south side suddenly disappeared. Not dead, just gone, moved out, cleared from the area, as if someone had leaned in close and whispered that this neighborhood now sat under the protection of a force they didn't want to anger, and the corner grocery where Mira bought milk for the kids stopped getting its windows smashed at night, and the old man who sold flowers at the end of the street told Mira the block had been strangely quiet lately. Probably the cops finally doing their job, And Mira nodded without thinking much of it, because she was busy thinking about her night shift at the sewing factory and the electric bill due this month. But then, Jace made the mistake every powerful man makes. He believed his presence was a gift, and on a Thursday afternoon, a black Escalade parked in front of the public school where Lily and Noah attended, and Jace stepped out, not in a suit but in a casual jacket, as if stripping away one layer of expensive fabric could erase 8 years of distance. 2 large gift bags in his hands, an iPad for Noah, a professional art set for Lily, things that cost more than their mother made in a month. "Lily, Noah, look what I brought for you," he called from outside the rusted iron fence, his voice trying to be gentle but still carrying the tone of a man used to giving orders more than giving love. Lily stood 10 steps from the fence, her eyes wide, and for one brief moment, something flickered there. Maybe hope, maybe the memory of the photo she kissed every night. But before she could step forward, Noah moved in front of her, the 8-year-old standing straight, his chin slightly lifted, both hands gripping the straps of his backpack, and he looked at Jace with eyes identical to Jace's. The same hardness, the same defiance, as if biology had handed him a weapon to use against the man who made him. "Mom says we don't talk to strangers. And you're a stranger." Jace opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the teacher at the gate pressed her walkie-talkie, and within 90 seconds, the school gates locked. The children were ushered inside. 2 police cars were called because an unknown man was approaching students through the fence. And Jace Valetti, the shadow boss of half of Chicago, stood outside a public school holding 2 gift bags while security told him to step back, and the sound of police sirens drew closer, and he had to move. He had to turn away. He had to let Flynn drive him out before the police saw his face. And that was the moment the Mafia boss understood his power ended at the rusted fence of a Southside public school. Mira arrived 15 minutes later after a call from the principal's office. She ran in and wrapped her arms around Lily and Noah. And when the staff described the unknown man, the height, the eye color, the glossy black SUV, Mira didn't say a word. She simply pulled a sheet of paper from her bag. A temporary restraining order filed by attorney Preston Hale at Cook County Court this morning. Mira had gone to a community legal aid clinic with the last money she'd saved, filing the paperwork through a pro bono volunteer, because after that Sunday afternoon, she knew Jace wouldn't stop. The temporary order, though simple, stated that Jace must keep a distance of 200 feet from Lily and Noah Donovan until the next hearing, and Mira photocopied the document and handed it to the school office, with hands that didn't shake because she'd shaken enough. Now it was time to be hard. That night, Jace sat in his car outside his mother's house in Oak Park, the red brick home where he'd grown up before blood and bullets changed everything, and he went in through the back door like he had as a boy, and Gloria Valetti was waiting in the kitchen, 63 years old, silver hair pinned up, spine straight, eyes the same color as Jace's, and the same color as Lily and Noah's. She already knew because in their world no secret stays buried for long, and she didn't ask. She didn't need him to explain. She simply rose when he entered, walked up to him, looked up because she was 2 heads shorter, and she slapped him. A slap from her right hand. The hand that had once slapped his father when he went too far. The hand of the woman who had ruled the Valetti family from the shadows for 30 years, and the sound cracked through the quiet kitchen like truth knocking on a door. "You didn't choose wrong because it was dangerous, Jace. Don't you dare use that excuse with me. You chose wrong because you were a coward. Your father was many things, terrible things, but he never denied his blood. You have 2 children eating cereal for dinner on the South Side while your name sits on buildings downtown. I didn't raise you for this." Jace stood still, his cheek burning, and he didn't lift a hand to rub it because he knew he deserved it. And Gloria turned and walked out of the kitchen without saying more, because for her a slap and the truth were enough. The rest Jace would have to find on his own, like every Valetti man, either find a way to do right or live and die with the consequences of keeping on doing wrong. In the private bathroom of the Lincoln Park mansion, where the rush of the shower could drown out any conversation, Celeste Harmon sat on the edge of the marble tub, legs crossed, back straight, a cheap burner phone in her hand, the kind bought with cash at a convenience store with no name attached, and she called the only number saved in it, no contact name, just a string of digits, and when the man on the other end picked up, Celeste didn't greet him, didn't ask how he was, offered nothing except the pure coldness of a woman who'd been acting for 6 years and could finally see the finish line. He has 2 children, Vance, twins, 8 years old. The mother is nobody, a seamstress living in a studio apartment on the south side. And Jace has been falling apart since he found out. He can't eat, can't sleep, can't focus. This is the crack we've been waiting for. Vance Kensington, the man who ruled the East Coast underworld from New York to Philadelphia, the man who'd planted Celeste in Jace Valetti's bed 6 years ago like a timed bomb, gave a soft laugh on the line, the low, slow laugh of someone watching a long plan finally start to pay off. Good. Get close to the woman. Make her trust you. Become the friend she's never had. And when the time is right, we burn his whole kingdom from the inside out. Use everything. The children, the money, the courts. I want Valetti broken, Celeste. Not just defeated. Broken. Celeste ended the call, removed the battery, hid both phone and battery in the secret compartment of the jewelry box Jace had given her for their 5-year anniversary, then stepped out of the bathroom with her face swollen and red because she'd splashed hot water into her eyes until they looked like she'd been crying all night. And when Jace saw her that morning, he saw a wife shattered by the discovery that her husband had a hidden past, and he held her, and she sank into his chest, and while he whispered apologies, she closed her eyes, and on her lips, hidden in the blonde hair falling over Jace's shoulder, was a smile as thin as a blade that no one saw. 2 weeks later, Celeste went looking for Mira, not at the South Side apartment, because that would have been too direct, too suspicious, but at a small cafe 4 blocks from the sewing factory where Mira worked the afternoon shift, the kind of place where coffee cost $2.50, and the Wi-Fi was free, and Celeste arrived dressed nothing like herself. No silk dress, no Chanel bag, no diamond watch, just jeans, an old sweater, her hair in a ponytail, eyes swollen, no makeup, looking like a woman who'd cried herself dry, and now had nothing left but exhaustion. And she waited until Mira walked in after her morning shift at the laundromat, because Celeste had someone tracking Mira's schedule for 2 weeks, and knew exactly that Mira came here every day at 2:15 for a black coffee, before starting her afternoon shift at the factory. Mira. Celeste stood when Mira entered, her voice trembling just enough to sound hesitant, but not so much it felt fake, and Mira stopped short because she recognized this woman, the face that had sat beside Jace in the restaurant on that Sunday afternoon, the woman Lily had seen smiling at her father. "I know this is strange," Celeste said, fingers turning her coffee cup. "And I know you have every reason to walk out right now, but I'm not here as Jace's wife. I'm here as a woman who just found out the man she married is a liar. He lied to you. He lied to me. He lied to everyone." Mira didn't sit. Her eyes narrowed, and 8 years alone had taught her how to read people, how to tell who could be trusted and who couldn't. But Celeste Harmon had been trained by Vance Kensington for 3 years for this moment, and her performance was perfect down to the smallest detail. The tremor in the right places, the lowered gaze at the right moments, the grip on the cup held at exactly the right pressure. "I found things, Mira. Bank accounts he's hidden, properties under fake names, shell companies. He has enough money to give your children everything they deserve, and he's hiding it. I'm a corporate lawyer. I know where to look." Celeste slid a thin folder across the table. Inside copies of bank statements, shell company filings, asset figures, all of it real because Celeste had legal access as his wife. But the way she arranged it, the way she highlighted it, the way she presented it, it was all designed to make Jace look like a monster hoarding money while his own children ate cereal for dinner. "I want to help you. Not for him, for your children. And for Brody. I want Brody to know his brother and sister. They're the only real family any of us have left." Mira looked at the folder, looked at Celeste, and inside her chest a battle sparked between the survival instinct that said, "Trust no one," and the 8-year exhaustion that said for the first time someone was standing on her side. For the first time someone said, "I want to help you without demanding anything," and the exhaustion won, the way it always wins when someone has been tired for too long. And Mira sat down, opened the folder, and began to read. 15 minutes later, Mira excused herself to use the restroom, and in the moment she disappeared behind the bathroom door, Celeste pulled the burner phone from her jacket pocket, lit the screen, typed 3 words to the only number saved inside. "She's in." Phase 2, then darkened the screen, slid the phone back into her pocket, and when Mira returned 30 seconds later, Celeste was sitting in the same posture, both hands wrapped around her coffee, eyes red and swollen, lips pressed tight, the face of a betrayed wife searching for justice. And Mira looked at her, and thought maybe this was the first friend she'd had in 8 years. And that was the most dangerous thought Mira Donovan had ever had. The lawsuit was filed in Cook County on an ordinary Monday morning. Black ink on white paper, stamped in red. No guns, no blood, nothing but the law, and it was the only weapon on earth Jace Valetti didn't know how to fight. Mira Donovan sued to establish paternity for Lily Donovan and Noah Donovan through DNA testing, and she also demanded 8 years of back child support under Illinois family law. And attorney Preston Hale, a heavy hitter, Celeste, had convinced Mira was necessary to replace her clinic. Volunteer was introduced as if it were a lucky coincidence, though it was really a calculated move to escalate the war. Drafted the petition to be airtight in court and written in language sharp enough that if it leaked, any reporter who read it could turn it into a front-page story. Preston Hale did that because he didn't know Celeste had chosen him for this exact reason. A lawyer who was talented, honest, aggressive, the kind who wouldn't stop until every last penny had been turned over. Jace received the summons in his loop office. Flynn handed it to him, and he read every line, every page, and for the first time in his life ruling the Valetti empire, he faced a war he couldn't win the usual way, because if he threatened Mira, she could go to the police, and the case would explode into a federal investigation. If he threatened the lawyer, Preston Hale would make everything public, and the FBI would start asking why a real estate businessman needed to threaten an attorney in a child support case. If he tried to buy the court, Celeste had already provided Mira's side enough financial evidence to show a pattern of hidden assets, and if he disappeared again, the court would enter a default judgment, and he'd lose control completely. This was a battlefield where guns couldn't fire, where bodyguards couldn't block, where underground power became a burden instead of an advantage, and Jace sat in the dark office staring at the summons like a sentence. Not a sentence from the court, but a sentence from 8 years ago, when he'd seen a positive pregnancy test and chose to run. But what was worse than the summons came 3 days later. Preston Hale filed supplemental evidence, an email printed on standard letter paper, an email Jace had sent Flynn 8 years ago, only days after he staged the accident, and the original content had been a single line: handle the situation. I can't deal with it right now. But the version Preston Hale received from Celeste, the version Celeste received from Vance, the version Vance had paid a technical specialist to alter, read like this: make the problem disappear. Pay whatever it takes. She can't keep it. I don't care what you have to do. 4 sentences instead of 1, and every added sentence was a blade. The forgery was so perfect, no digital forensic expert could detect the difference, because Vance Kensington didn't spare money when he bought weapons, and that fake email was the dirtiest bomb he'd ever built. That email went straight to the core of the case. It didn't just prove Jace knew Mira was pregnant. It proved he deliberately ordered the child eliminated, and when Preston Hale read it, he knew he was holding the kind of evidence that could destroy Jace Valetti in court, and he filed it immediately, not knowing he was carrying a gun loaded by Jace's enemy. The consequences came fast, like falling dominoes. The court ordered Jace's legitimate accounts, frozen pending judgment, business accounts, trusts, properties under his real name, all locked, and Jace was pushed into a corner where he had to use underground money, cash, laundered money, money from channels that, if discovered, would open a RICO investigation big enough to put him in federal prison for 30 years. Flynn came to Jace on the Thursday night after the email hit the record, and this time, the second-in-command brought no files, no updates, only a warning he'd been holding back for 2 weeks because he didn't have enough proof. But now he couldn't stay silent. Boss, someone inside the house is feeding information to the other side. The email should have been buried. I deleted it myself 8 years ago, from every server, every backup, every device. There's no way Preston Hale got it unless someone with access to our internal systems pulled it from somewhere I didn't know existed. And the bank records Mira's lawyer has. Those aren't public. Someone gave them the exact accounts, the exact amounts, the exact routing numbers. This isn't a leak, Jace. This is a pipeline. Someone in your home is working for Vance Kensington. Jace listened, and the Mafia boss instinct kicked in instantly. He started sorting the list. Drivers, bodyguards, house staff, the manager, the cook. Each one placed under a microscope, every call monitored, every transaction traced. He suspected everyone, from the gardener to the chief accountant, from the night driver to Brody's caretaker. He turned over every stone in his empire to find the snake, but he never looked at the pillow beside him in bed, because Celeste still cried every night, still held him and whispered that she was afraid of losing him, still cooked breakfast for Brody, and asked Jace in a trembling voice whether they were going to get through this. Still played the wounded wife trying to keep her family from breaking apart. And she played it perfectly, more perfectly than anyone Jace had ever met. Because Celeste Harmon wasn't an amateur. She was Vance Kensington's 3-year creation. Trained to love without loving, to cry without pain, to lie beside the enemy every night without her heart skipping a beat. And while Jace tore his empire apart looking for a traitor, the traitor was in his kitchen making him coffee and asking if he wanted sugar. The entire South Side lost power at 9:45 on Wednesday night. The kind of blackout that happened 3 or 4 times a month in neighborhoods the city never rushed to fix. And the industrial sewing factory, where Mira was working the night shift, dropped into complete darkness. Sewing machines freezing mid-stitch, fluorescent lights dying at once, leaving only the dim red glow of the exit sign at the end of the hallway, running on a backup battery. And Mira stayed alone because she was the only one scheduled tonight, her fingertips sliding along the edge of fabric in the dark as she waited for the electricity to return because she didn't have another choice. She couldn't go home because Jolie was watching the kids, and if Mira left early, it meant losing half a shift, which meant losing half the money, which meant not making rent this month. She heard a car pull up outside, not the sound of an Escalade engine or the hush of luxury tires, but the sound of a normal car, then footsteps on the cracked sidewalk. Just one person, and then silence. Mira didn't move. Minutes later, she heard something set down gently at the factory door, the soft thud of a box against concrete. Then the whisper of fabric laid on top, and then silence again, and curiosity beat caution. She stood, moved past the rows of sewing machines in the dark she knew by heart, opened the heavy metal door, and looked down to see a box of hot food, steam rising into the cold October Chicago air, and a folded jacket placed neatly on top. Not an expensive coat, not cashmere or Italian leather, just a plain, thick jacket, the kind someone had chosen on purpose so it wouldn't look like him. Mira lifted her head and saw Jace leaning against the car parked across the street, alone. No Flynn, no security, no one, just a man standing in the blackout darkness. And in that darkness, he didn't look like a mafia boss. He didn't look like the man at the VIP table, slicing steak with a silver knife. He looked like the 28-year-old she'd known 9 years ago. The street kid who used to come to the laundromat where she worked and wait for her shift to end, just to walk her home. And that moment was more dangerous than any lie, because it almost looked like the truth. They stared at each other across the dark street, the first time with no rusted school fence between them, no lawyer's table, no summons, no bodyguards, no children crying, only 2 people standing in the dark that both of them knew in different ways. Mira knew darkness because she'd lived in it for 8 years. Jace knew darkness because he'd made it for 8 years. "Stalking me now?" Mira asked, her voice not angry, just tired. The kind of tired where anger doesn't even have enough energy to exist anymore. "Protecting you," Jace answered, not stepping closer, keeping his distance across the street, as if he understood every step toward her had to be allowed by her, not decided by him. "You don't get to protect us now, Jace. You lost that right 8 years ago when you chose your empire over your children." She said it, then stepped back inside and shut the metal door, the clang echoing down the dark street like a gate closing for the last time. And Jace stood on the other side listening to that sound, then turned away, got into his car, and drove off into the darkness, not turning on his headlights until he made it around the corner. Mira stood inside the factory with her back against the door, looking down at the food and the jacket at her feet. And she stood there for a long time, longer than she needed to. Then she bent down, picked up the food, opened it, sat on the factory floor in the dark, and ate, because she hadn't eaten since morning and her stomach had been growling for 3 hours. But she'd skipped meals so often she didn't even notice hunger anymore. She finished every bite, then lifted the jacket, brought it to her nose, and it didn't smell like expensive cologne. It didn't smell like anything except new fabric, and she took it home when her shift ended, wearing it for the 4-block walk from the factory to her apartment in the October wind, because after 8 years, Mira Donovan was too tired to be proud about warmth. Sunday in Lincoln Park, yellow leaves falling onto green grass, children running everywhere, and if anyone walked past the stone bench near the small pond, they would have seen 2 women sitting side by side like old friends watching their kids play. A beautiful, peaceful picture, the kind people snap and post online with a peace hashtag. But the truth was that one of those women was playing a chess game. The other didn't even know she was a pawn in. Celeste brought Brody first. A 5-year-old boy with brown hair and blue eyes that looked so much like Vance Kensington's that if anyone paid close attention, they'd see he didn't carry a single trace of Jace. But no one paid close attention, because no one goes looking for lies in a place they believe is safe. And when Mira arrived with Lily and Noah, the 3 children stood staring at each other with the cautious curiosity of kids who'd learned pain too early. Lily stayed behind her mother, one hand gripping the hem of Mira's dress, but her eyes watched Brody with the kind of curiosity only children have. Curiosity without judgment, only the need to know. Noah stood beside his sister with his arms crossed, chin slightly lifted, the posture he'd held since that Sunday afternoon in the restaurant, the posture of a guard. Brody was the one who broke the silence. He walked up, holding the blue plastic model plane he carried everywhere, and offered it to Noah and Lily, with the innocence of a child who didn't yet know the world runs on lies. "Wanna play? My dad's gone too, but I have a plane." Noah looked at the plane, then at Brody. And in that moment, something shifted on the face of the 8-year-old. Not softening, but less hard, because he recognized the child in front of him had lost something too. And shared hurt is a language every child understands, even when no one teaches it. Lily let go of her mother's dress, stepped forward and took the wing of the plane, and the 3 children started running across the grass, Brody leading with the plane raised high, Lily chasing and laughing, and Noah running last, not smiling, but running. And sometimes running is enough. On the bench, Mira watched her children, and for the first time in weeks, she saw Lily laugh. The laugh of an 8-year-old who didn't need a reason, only green grass and a plastic plane and a new friend. And Mira turned toward Celeste with a gratitude she couldn't put into words because she wasn't used to being helped. Celeste smiled back, warm, eyes slightly wet, her hand squeezing Mira's hand like a promise that didn't need words. But if anyone looked closely, looked past the perfect performance, looked deep into those cold blue eyes, in the moment Mira turned away to watch her kids, they would have seen there were no tears at all, only calculation, sharp and exact. The gaze of someone measuring trust to know how much farther it had to go before she could strike. Alongside those Sunday afternoons at the park, Jace began sending handwritten letters to Lily and Noah. Not through the mail because he feared Mira would throw them away before the children ever saw them, but slipped into the apartment building's mailbox. Plain white envelopes with no return name, only the words for Lily and for Noah, written by hand, and Mira knew exactly where they came from, but she didn't throw them out. She placed them on the kitchen table and let the kids decide. The first letter Noah picked up, stared at the handwriting on the envelope, then tore it in half without opening it, tearing it with the same cold certainty he'd used when he tore the photo. The second letter, 3 days later, torn. The third, the next week, torn. But the fourth arrived on a rainy evening when Noah came home soaked because he'd given Lily his umbrella, and he picked up the envelope, lifted both hands to tear it, then stopped. Standing in the kitchen, with the letter in his grip, while rainwater dripped from his hair onto the paper, and he didn't tear it. He didn't open it either. He just carried it into the bedroom, tucked it under his pillow, lay down, and said nothing. That night, after Noah fell asleep, Lily climbed down from the lower bunk, gently slid the letter from beneath her brother's pillow, opened it under the star-shaped nightlight Mira had bought at a dollar store, and she read with wide eyes in the dark, reading every line of the messy handwriting of the man she used to draw with golden wings. Dear Lily and Noah, I'm not an angel. I never was. I'm not a hero. I'm not even a good man. I'm just a man who made the worst mistake a father can make. I left. I don't have an excuse. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I want you to know that the drawing you made of a man with wings, the one your teacher pinned on the school bulletin board, I found it. I don't know how to explain how I found it, without sounding like the person I'm trying not to be anymore. But I found it, and I keep it in my pocket now, in the same pocket where your brother used to keep my photo, and I look at it every night, and every night I think the same thing. You drew me better than I ever was, and I'm sorry I couldn't be the father you invented. Lily folded the letter, tucked it back under Noah's pillow, climbed into the top bunk, lay down, and for the first time since that afternoon in the restaurant, she didn't cry before she fell asleep. Celeste made her next move on a Friday afternoon, sitting in the mansion bathroom with a burner phone and calling a number Vance had provided, the number of 2 low-level Chicago muscle Vance hired from outside the organization, so there'd be no traceable link, and she read Mira's apartment address. Read the factory shift end time. Read the route Mira walked home every night through the alley between Halstead and Morgan on the south side, reading it all in a flat, emotionless voice like a grocery list. And when the man on the other end asked what needed to be done, Celeste said, "Scare her. Rough her up enough to make the news. Don't kill her. She's useless to us dead. But make sure Jace sees it. Make sure he loses control. Make sure he does something stupid enough for the feds to pick up." The plan was simple and ruthless. Mira gets attacked, Jace goes insane, hunts the attackers the only way he knows, violence, and that violence leaves a trail. That trail brings the FBI to his door. And the Valetti empire collapses not from a bullet, but from a single mother getting beaten in a dark alley, and Celeste stands outside watching it all burn with dry eyes. That Friday night, Mira clocked out of the sewing factory at 11:15, later than usual because she stayed to fix a defective batch to earn an extra $50. Jolie brought Lily and Noah to meet her at the factory gate, because Jolie couldn't watch the kids tonight since her daughter was sick, and the three of them walked home through the familiar alley between Halstead and Morgan, the alley that in daylight was just a shortcut, but at night became a long strip of darkness where the streetlight had been broken for 3 months, and no one fixed it. Lily held Mira's left hand. Noah walked on her right, his right hand gripping the small flashlight Mira bought at a dollar store for him to carry to school, because Chicago winters get dark early, and he aimed the beam at the ground so his mom and sister wouldn't step on broken glass. A small act no 8-year-old should ever have to do, but Noah did it every night because he understood there was no one else in this house besides him to protect his mom and his sister. They made it halfway down the alley when a black SUV with no plates turned in from the Morgan end, headlights off, only daytime running lights throwing a weak glow onto the brick walls, and it stopped, blocking the path. Both doors opening at the same time, 2 big men stepping out in hoodies, and one of them pulled an aluminum baseball bat from behind his back, the metallic slap into his palm, ringing in the alley like a death bell. Mira shoved Lily behind her on instinct, but before she could yank Noah back, the boy stepped in front of her, clicked off the flashlight, stood straight, the little flashlight clenched in his fist like the only weapon he had, and he shouted in an 8-year-old voice that echoed off the walls, "Don't touch my mom." The shout didn't stop them. They kept coming, and the one with the bat lifted it high. Mira dragged Noah back and wrapped both children tight against her, bracing to turn and shield them with her body because that was all she had. No armor, no weapon, no bodyguards, just the back of a mother and the hope it would be enough. Then the darkness behind the 2 men split apart. There were no footsteps, no warning, no stop or I'll shoot like in the movies. Just a figure peeling out of the black at the far end of the alley, fast and silent, like something that had lived in the dark, so long the dark became part of its body. The Batman went down first, the aluminum clattering to the wet pavement before he even understood what happened. One strike to the elbow joint, snapping bone and dropping the bat, then a second strike behind the knee, folding him to the ground. All of it silent, fast, precise like surgery performed in the dark. The second man turned, his hand reaching into his hoodie pocket, but he was a second too slow, and a second was more than enough. His arm got locked, his shoulder wrenched backward, and he slammed face first onto the wet ground with a groan the darkness swallowed. 30 seconds, start to finish. 30 seconds while Mira stood shaking with her kids in her arms, and when her eyes adjusted, she saw Jace standing between the 2 men sprawled on the pavement, breathing steady, not a bead of sweat on his forehead, his hands hanging loose but his fingers still slightly curled, ready. And she realized this wasn't the Jace from the night outside the factory. This wasn't the Jace writing letters to his kids. This was Jace Valetti, the boss, the most dangerous version of him, the one all of Chicago feared. And that version had just saved her children. Flynn stepped out of a car parked at the Halstead end with a walkie-talkie in his hand. He'd been tracking Mira in person tonight, because 2 days ago he discovered someone had accessed her schedule from an internal source, and he didn't like the smell of it. And he called Jace, and Jace came, not in an Escalade or a Rolls-Royce, but in the normal car he'd driven to the factory the night before. The same car Mira didn't realize it was, and he arrived in time, because sometimes that's all a father can do. Arrive in time, even if he's 8 years late. Jace stepped past the 2 men without looking down, walked to Mira and the kids, and he didn't stand over them. He dropped to his knees, his knee hitting the wet, filthy alley pavement, eye level with Noah, and the boy was shaking, not from fear of the attackers, but from the adrenaline draining out of an 8-year-old body. and leaving hollow behind. And Jace looked into his son's eyes identical to his, and said, "I'm here now, Noah. I know I wasn't here before, but I'm here now, and no one on this earth will ever touch you, your sister, or your mother again." Noah looked at Jace, and this time he didn't say, "I wish you were dead." He didn't say, "We don't talk to strangers." He didn't say anything at all. He just nodded, a small, slow nod, almost invisible in the dark. But Jace saw it, and that nod, from the child who tore his photo, tore his letters, and called him a stranger, was worth more than every empire he'd ever built. Mira stood in the alley with Lily clinging to her waist, Noah between her and Jace, and she looked at the two men on the ground, looked at the dark alley she'd walked through every night for 8 years with 2 children, looked at the world she'd tried to survive on her own, and she understood with the icy clarity of someone who had just seen a bat raised over her child's head that the world without Jace was more dangerous than the world with him, and the protection she'd refused out of pride almost made her children pay. "Okay," she said, voice low, eyes on Jace, but not soft, not forgiving, not trusting, only accepting. "Okay. But this doesn't change anything between us. This is for them. Only for them." Jace nodded, stood up, and Mira and the kids walked past the groaning men toward Flynn's car, and Jace followed behind at a distance, guarding them from the rear, the exact place he should have been standing 8 years ago. After the night in the alley, Flynn didn't sleep. He sat in the safe apartment in the West Loop that only he and Jace knew about. 3 laptop screens open in front of him, and he did what he'd wanted to do 2 weeks earlier but hadn't had enough reason to do. He tore through everything, not hunting for a traitor among the security team or the house staff anymore, because they were all clean, but hunting in the only place no one had dared to look, inside Jace's home, inside the master bedroom, inside the life of the woman who slept beside the boss every night. Flynn waited until Tuesday, when Celeste took Brody to school at the private academy in the Gold Coast. Then he entered the mansion with the spare key he kept for emergencies, and he searched, not rushed, methodical, room by room, drawer by drawer, compartment by compartment, and he found the burner phone in the hidden slot of Celeste's jewelry box on her vanity, the rosewood box Jace had bought her for their 5-year anniversary, and inside the secret compartment, with the battery removed and stored separately, lay a cheap prepaid phone with no registration. And when Flynn snapped the battery in and powered it on, he saw a message history with a single number. "She's in. Phase 2. Address confirmed. Halstead and Morgan. Fridays 11:15 at night. Timeline moving. Need 3 more weeks." And the most recent message, sent Thursday night, 1 day before the alley attack. "Green light. Make it loud." Flynn photographed everything, returned the phone to the exact position, the exact angle, the battery removed the same way, then left the mansion, and on his way out he stopped in the kitchen, where Brody's water glass from breakfast still hadn't been washed, and he pulled a zip bag from his jacket, swabbed the rim where the boy's lips had touched with a cotton tip, sealed it in the bag, because one question had haunted Flynn since the first day he'd looked at Brody, a 5-year-old with no dimple, no freckle under the left eye, no trace of the Valetti bloodline. Flynn had watched for 18 years serving this family, and now he needed to know why. The DNA results came back 4 days later from a private lab Flynn paid in cash to leave no trail, and when he opened the report in the safe apartment, the number on the page confirmed what his instincts had been screaming for a long time. The probability of paternity between Jace Valetti and Brody Harmon was 0%. Not low, not questionable, but no, a clean absolute 0. Brody wasn't Jace's son and never had been, and 3 years of Jace holding that boy, teaching him to ride a bike, calling him his son, had all been built on a lie Celeste planted, with the precision of someone trained to destroy from the inside. Flynn laid everything out for Jace in the Loop office on a Saturday night, placing the burner phone message, photos on the desk, the DNA result, and the analysis tracing the number Celeste called back to a contact line known to belong to the Kensington organization on the East Coast. Jace read every page slowly, and Flynn watched his boss collapse for the second time in less than 2 months. The first time when he learned he had 2 biological children who'd spent 8 years in poverty, and now when he learned the child he believed was his, the child he'd held every night, read stories to, bought the first model plane for, didn't carry a single drop of his blood, and the woman he'd trusted most in his house, the only person he never suspected, was a spy planted in his bed by an enemy for 3 years, And the alley attack where his real son had stood in front of a raised baseball bat had been because of her. She read the address. She gave the green light. She nearly got his children killed to break him. Jace didn't smash anything. Didn't shout. Didn't explode the way Flynn expected. Instead, he sat very still for a long time. Long enough that Flynn thought he was in shock. But he wasn't. Jace was thinking. And when he finished, his eyes changed. The pain pulled back, and something colder slid into its place. Sharper. The thing Flynn had seen many times before every major war. The boss's survival instinct. The instinct that doesn't answer with emotion. It answers with strategy. She doesn't know we know, Jace said, his voice flat, eyes on the wall. No, Flynn confirmed. Then she doesn't know. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not until I say so. I want her to keep playing her game. But now we're playing ours. Jace built the trap over 2 weeks. Patient, precise, never letting a single sign slip. He still held Celeste every night, still kissed Brody every morning, still sat through family dinners like nothing had changed. And every night after Celeste fell asleep, he lay staring at the ceiling and planned. He gave Celeste one piece of information, only one, about a major shipment at Pier 7 in South Chicago on Friday night the following week. A shipment worth millions, the kind of detail Vance couldn't ignore. And he told her in a deliberately exhausted voice, as if it slipped out because the pressure had cracked him. Pier 7, Friday, the big shipment. I can't afford to lose this one, Cel. Not with the accounts frozen. Celeste nodded, squeezed his hand, said, "You'll get through this, baby." And that night, he heard the shower running in the bathroom, where she was calling Vance on the burner phone she didn't know had been fully copied. On Friday night at Pier 7, Vance Kensington flew 12 men from the East Coast into Chicago, fully armed, and they hit Warehouse 7A at 2 in the morning, and they found no cargo, nothing at all except an empty building and the headlights of 6 unmarked ATF vehicles and 2 federal SWAT teams, closing in from 3 directions, because Jace had moved all evidence of Vance's operation in Chicago, including the cloned burner phone data, recorded calls, and financial traces, through Preston Hale to a federal prosecutor who specialized in RICO cases and who Preston had known since law school, and Jace didn't need to show up, didn't need to testify, he didn't need to touch it. He only needed the law to do what he would normally do with a gun. And that night Vance Kensington was cuffed on the concrete floor of Pier 7, with 12 of his men under a RICO indictment, heavy enough to keep him in federal prison for at least 25 years. And Celeste, lying in the Lincoln Park mansion bed, didn't know her only safety net had just collapsed, didn't know the man she worked for was face down on a warehouse floor with his hands in cuffs, and didn't know that beside her Jace wasn't sleeping. He lay awake in the dark, waiting. Because the hardest part wasn't catching Vance. The hardest part was facing the woman in his bed and telling her the game was over. On Saturday morning, the news of the arrests at Pier 7 flooded every Chicago broadcast. 13 men taken in the biggest federal RICO operation of the decade, and Vance Kensington's name on every screen. But inside the Lincoln Park mansion, Celeste didn't watch the news because she didn't know yet. She still cooked breakfast for Brody, still kissed Jace's cheek when he sat down, still played her part perfectly. And Jace ate like normal, asked Brody if he wanted to go to the park, smiled at the right moments, said the right lines, and he waited. Waited until the nanny carried Brody upstairs for his nap, waited until the house went quiet, waited until Celeste settled onto the living room sofa with a glass of white wine and that tired wife smile of someone trying to keep a family from breaking apart. The smile that for 3 years had made Jace believe she was the best thing that ever happened to him. And only then did he begin. Jace walked to the coffee table in the middle of the room and set down 2 things, the burner phone and the DNA report, placing them gently, precisely, side by side, like a man laying down the last 2 cards in a poker hand he'd known he won before he ever turned them over. Celeste looked down, and in the first instant, not even a full second, her eyes widened and her pupils tightened, the kind of reaction no one can control no matter how well they act, the body's reflex, when the brain realizes the game is over, before the will can order the face to stay calm. But then she recovered. Fast. Almost frighteningly fast. Took a sip of wine, set the glass down, and looked up at Jace with eyes that still seemed wet, still sad, still performing. "Jace, what is this? What are you?" "Stop." Jace said a single word and there was no anger in it, no pain, only the pure cold of a man who had spent the last 2 weeks lying beside an enemy every night, without letting a single breath slip out of rhythm. 6 years, Celeste. 6 years you slept next to me with a knife behind your back. 3 years you kissed me goodnight and then called Vance in the bathroom. 5 years you let me hold Brody, teach him to ride a bike, read him bedtime stories, call him my son knowing that he's not mine. Jace paused, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped so low it was nearly a whisper, but the kind of whisper more dangerous than a shout. You used a child as a weapon. You put a little boy in the middle of a war he doesn't even know exists, and turned him into a tool. I've done terrible things, Celeste. Things that keep me up at night, but even I, even at my worst, wouldn't do that. The living room went silent, afternoon light slipping through white curtains and laying long shadows across the wood floor, and Celeste sat there with the wine beside her, the burner phone and the DNA report in front of her. And something strange happened. She stopped acting. Not slowly, not gradually, but like a light switch flipping off. The softness drained from her face. The wetness vanished from her eyes in a blink. The trembling in her shoulders stopped. Her spine straightened. And the woman sitting in front of Jace now was someone else. No, it was her for the first time. The real Celeste Harmon with no mask, no script, no tears, only steel-cold eyes and a slow smile spreading across her mouth. The smile of someone who had kept a knife hidden for too long and finally felt relief when she could pull it out. Finally, she said, her voice completely different. Lower, steadier, no tremble, no softness. I was getting tired of pretending to love you. She stood, finished her wine, and looked at Jace with an expression he'd never seen in 5 years of marriage. An expression that was real. You think you're better than me, Jace. You think because you found the phone and ran a DNA test you've won. Let me tell you something. You abandoned your own blood, 2 children, for 8 years. You looked at a pregnant girl and ran. At least I had a strategy. At least everything I did served a purpose. You just had cowardice. And cowardice doesn't get to judge strategy. The words hit Jace harder than he expected because they were true. Not entirely true, but true enough to hurt. And in that moment, the Mafia boss and the spy faced each other in the mansion living room, 2 liars looking at each other with truth for the first time, and neither of them looked clean. Celeste set the empty glass down, turned, and moved fast up the stairs. And Jace knew exactly where she was going. She was going for Brody. And he said her name once, Celeste, just her name, nothing else. But she didn't stop. She ran to the 2nd floor, opened Brody's bedroom door, lifted the sleeping boy up, wrapped the blanket around him, and ran down the back staircase to the garage. And Jace didn't block her because he saw Brody in her arms, and he didn't dare. He didn't dare let violence show itself in front of the child he'd called his son for 3 years. Celeste drove the Mercedes out of the garage, tires squealing on the driveway, Brody crying in the back seat from being jolted awake, and she drove fast, too fast, out of Lincoln Park, onto the Kennedy Expressway, then onto Interstate 90 heading north, and as she drove she grabbed a backup burner phone, a second one Flynn never found because she kept it hidden in the car. Dialed Vance, no signal. Dialed again, no signal. Dialed a 3rd time, and this time the call connected, but there was only a long ring because Vance's phone was sitting in an evidence bag at the Chicago field office, and Celeste understood. No one was coming. Vance had been arrested. The network had collapsed. 6 years undercover, 6 years performing, 6 years sleeping beside the enemy. All of it ending with a long ring in the night on the highway, and she typed her last message one-handed, while the other hand held the wheel at 95 miles an hour on Interstate 90. They know. 2 words, her thumb hitting send. But the message didn't leave the phone before the headlights of an 18-wheeler flared ahead. Celeste jerked the wheel, too fast, too hard. The Mercedes lost control at 95 miles an hour, spun sideways, slammed into the concrete median, flipped, and slid upside down for 30 meters, with metal screaming against asphalt. And when it finally stopped, silence returned. Only the click-click of the engine and Brody's crying from the back seat where the child harness had kept him intact, bruised and terrified but alive, while Celeste sat in the driver's seat with her head slumped against a deflated airbag, her eyes open, and in her hand, the burner phone still glowed. The message, "They know," frozen in the draft box with the cursor blinking. Never sent, and never to be sent, because Celeste Harmon died on Interstate 90 on a Saturday night in November in Chicago, with her last lie still trapped in her hand. Brody lay in a bed at Lurie Children's Hospital, his left arm in a cast, a bandage on his forehead, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, and he looked smaller than 5 when he slept under white sheets and the steady beeping of the heart monitor, the blue plastic model plane the firefighters found in the wreck set on the bedside table. One wing broken but still there, like the boy himself, broken but still here. Jace stood beside the bed, not sitting because he didn't believe he'd earned the right to sit, standing for 4 straight hours since the hospital called at 1 in the morning, staring at the child he now knew wasn't his but had called him Dad for 3 years. A child whose mother had used him like a chess piece and was now lying in the hospital morgue 3 floors below. And the boy didn't know. Not yet. He would have to know. But not today. Flynn waited in the hallway, watching through the small glass panel in the door, and when Jace stepped out, Flynn spoke in a low, careful voice. "Boss, the kid isn't yours. Celeste played you. He's Vance's son. You don't have any legal obligation here. Celeste has no family on file. Vance is in federal custody. The state will put him in the system." Jace looked through the window at Brody, curled on his side, the casted arm wrapped around the broken wing plane, and Jace remembered teaching him how to hold that plane, remembered Brody laughing when Jace made engine noises with his mouth, remembered the boy tearing across the backyard screaming, "Daddy, look, I'm flying." And in that moment, DNA didn't mean a damn thing. He called me Dad for 5 years. Flynn. 3 years. I already lost 2 children because I was a coward. I'm not losing another one because of a lab result. Jace called Preston Hale the next morning, not to sue, not to attack anyone, but to file for legal guardianship of Brody Harmon in Cook County. And Preston asked if he was sure, because the process would be messy, and DCFS would investigate, and Jace's past wasn't exactly clean. And Jace said, "Do it. I'll deal with DCFS. I'll deal with whatever comes. Just make sure that boy doesn't wake up alone." 3 days later, when Brody was well enough to leave the hospital, and the court granted Jace temporary custody pending the guardianship hearing, Jace asked Mira to meet him at the small Southside cafe where Celeste had first approached her. The coincidence of the place unintentional but cruel, and Jace sat across from Mira, and for the first time since they'd run into each other on that Sunday afternoon in the restaurant, he told the truth. All of it. Without hiding, without excuses, without softening. He told her about Celeste, that she'd been Vance's spy planted 6 years ago, that Brody wasn't his child but Vance's, that Celeste had used Mira as a weapon, that the email about making the problem disappear had been edited, that Celeste was the one who gave Vance's men Mira's address, and the route through the alley on Friday night. Every detail. And when he finished, Mira sat in silence for a long time, her coffee cold in front of her, and she looked at Jace with eyes he couldn't read, because after 8 years she'd learned to hide everything behind them. "My whole life, Jace. My whole life has been surrounded by lies. Yours, hers, even mine, the ones I told Lily and Noah about the angel. I'm so tired of it. All of it." Jace nodded, and he didn't apologize because he'd apologized enough, and apologies had lost their value a long time ago. Instead, he said the only thing he still believed could mean something. "Then don't listen to what I say, Mira. Don't trust my words. Watch what I do. From now on. Every single day." And he did. Every morning at 6:30, the plane car parked in front of the Southside apartment. Not an Escalade, not a Rolls-Royce. The same ordinary car Mira had seen outside the factory, and Jace drove Lily and Noah to school. Not their old public school, but a better one on the north side that Jace had enrolled them in and paid for. But he left the signatures for Mira, because he understood the right to decide belonged to her. Every afternoon at 3:15, he waited outside the school gates to pick them up. And in the first days, Noah refused to get in, standing in the schoolyard and shaking his head. And Jace didn't force him. He sat in the driver's seat and waited. Waited until Noah climbed in, or until Mira arrived. And if Noah didn't get in, Jace followed the bus the boy took. Far enough back to keep distance, close enough to make sure he got home safely before Jace turned away. Every day, without missing one, no matter the weather, no matter what he'd had to handle in the Empire, no matter how little he'd slept, he showed up, 6:30 in the morning, 3:15 in the afternoon. And that repetition, that boring, reliable presence, no drama, no hero speeches, no rescuing anyone from a dark alley, just showing up, that was what began to change everything. In the 3rd week, Noah started getting into the car without Mira telling him to. In the 4th week, he took the front seat instead of the back. In the 5th week, he asked Jace why the radio always played the same song, and Jace said it was because he didn't know how to change the station in this car, and Noah did it for him, and it was the most ordinary conversation they'd ever had, and it mattered more than all the letters Jace had written. Then, on a Wednesday morning, it was pouring, the kind of December Chicago rain so cold it nearly froze on the windshield. 6:30 came, and Noah looked out the apartment window and didn't see the car. 6:40, still no car. 6:50. Noah stood at the window with his eyes locked on the wet street, and Mira noticed something she'd never seen before. Her son was worried, not for himself, but for Jace. The boy had gone from tearing his father's photo to worrying when his father's car didn't show up. And that change hadn't come from a dramatic moment, it had come from 6 weeks of being on time every morning. "Mom, where is he?" Noah asked, his voice trying to stay casual, while his fingers tapped against the windowsill. Mira called Jace. The phone rang 4 times. Then he picked up, his voice slightly different, slightly tight. "I'm coming. Tell Noah I'm coming." 10 minutes. 12 minutes later, the car pulled up, and Noah ran out before Mira could even tell him to grab an umbrella, ran down the stairs and out the door, then stopped when he saw Jace step out in the rain, his left arm wrapped from wrist to elbow, shirt soaked through, and his right hand holding a paper bag of breakfast from the bakery Noah liked on Division. The bakery Jace had started stopping at every morning since week 3, and he'd stopped there today, even with blood seeping through the bandage, because last night he'd handled something in the Empire Mira didn't need to know, and would never know. But he still came, 12 minutes late, but he came. Noah stood in the rain looking at Jace, looking at the bandaged arm, looking at the breakfast bag. And he didn't ask what happened to his arm, didn't ask what happened last night. He stepped forward, reached out, and took Jace's bandaged hand, an 8-year-old's small fingers wrapping a large hand covered in gauze. Gentle, careful, as if he was afraid of hurting him. And he said 2 words Jace would remember until he died. "You're late." Not angry, not accusing, just the way an 8-year-old says "I was worried about you" without knowing how to say it out loud. And Jace smiled, the first real smile in months, a smile with no calculation, no mask, no empire behind it, just a father standing in the rain with a bandaged arm and breakfast, smiling because his son had held his hand for the first time. That afternoon, Lily sat on the living room floor with the professional art set Mira had finally let her accept from Jace, spread open in front of her, and she drew, not the man with golden wings she'd drawn for 8 years, not an angel in the clouds. She drew a man standing in the rain with his left arm wrapped in white bandages, a paper bag in his right hand, and beside him a boy holding his hand. And above the picture in 8-year-old block letters, not Dad with wings like all the drawings before, but Dad with bandages, and the drawing wasn't as pretty as the golden angels. The lines shaky, the colors smeared, the rain made of uneven, slanted blue strokes, but it was more real than any wings Lily had ever drawn, because for the first time she wasn't drawing a father from imagination. She was drawing what she'd seen with her own eyes. A man who wasn't perfect, who was hurt, who was soaked, but who showed up. A year after that rainy morning when Noah took Jace's bandaged hand outside the Southside apartment, everything was different. Not different like a fairy tale miracle, but different in the slow, painful, patient way people change when they've been through hell and decide to rebuild from ashes instead of gold. Jace Valetti was no longer the man all of Chicago feared, not because he'd lost power, but because he chose to let go, chose to move his empire into the light under Preston Hale's guidance. Shell businesses turned into real ones, laundering channels shut down one by one, and Jace knew he'd never be completely clean. The darkness had soaked too deep into his bones, but he was walking toward the light anyway. Slowly but without turning back, because every morning at 6:30 he had a reason to wake up, and that reason wasn't an empire. It was 3 children waiting for breakfast from the bakery on Division. Mira Donovan didn't sew night shifts in a Southside factory anymore. She opened her own small fashion studio in Wicker Park, with the compensation from the child support ruling, plus an investment Jace offered that Mira only accepted once she had full control over everything, from the shop name to the stitch work. And she designed dresses, not cheap mass-produced pieces, but beautiful dresses with a soul, dresses where every seam told a story. And the dress she was proudest of, the one she spent 3 months hand-stitching every night after the kids fell asleep, was the dress she wore today, her own wedding dress. White, simple, every millimeter perfect, no uneven hem like the dress she wore to that restaurant a year ago, because her hands were still calloused, but now they were calloused by choice, not by survival. The wedding wasn't an underworld spectacle, not a 500-guest ballroom in a downtown hotel, but a small backyard ceremony at their new house in the Chicago suburbs, a house with a yard wide enough for 3 kids to run, and a white wooden fence. Jace painted himself because Lily wanted a white fence like the one in her drawings. Only family, no reporters, no business partners, no one from the old world, only the people who belonged to the new one they were building. Gloria Valetti sat in the front row at 64, silver-haired, spine still straight, and she cried, not from sadness but because she'd lived long enough to see her son finally do one thing right, and she cried because her husband didn't live long enough to witness it. And she cried because the 2 grandchildren she almost never got to know were standing at the end of the aisle, scattering white petals onto green grass. Flynn Corsaro stood beside Jace under the small white flower arch as the best man, black suit, face as hard as ever, because 18 years in the underworld had taught him to forget how to show feelings in public, but his eyes were red, and he didn't wipe them because wiping would be admitting. And Flynn didn't admit anything, but the redness told the truth anyway. Jolie sat in the second row and had been crying since before the ceremony began, because she'd watched Mira survive 8 years of hell, and now she was watching her friend walk in a wedding dress she'd sewn herself, and she didn't need another reason to cry. Brody stood at the end of the aisle beside Lily, 6 years old, holding a flower basket, living with Jace now under the court's guardianship ruling, knowing his mother was gone, knowing Jace wasn't his biological father, but at 6 he only knew Mira cooked well, and Noah let him play with trucks, and Lily held his hand when they crossed the street, and sometimes that's enough to call a place home. The music started, not an orchestra, just a small speaker playing the song Mira chose, and at the head of the aisle, Mira appeared in her handmade white dress, hair pinned simply, no diamonds, no expensive jewelry, only the scrap cloth hair clip Lily made for her from leftover fabric at the new studio, like the clip Mira once made for Lily's birthday a year ago. And beside her, holding her left hand with his right, wasn't her father because Mira didn't have one, wasn't a brother because she didn't have one. It was Noah, 9 years old in a small suit, hair neatly combed, face serious, chin slightly lifted, walking steady with the steps of a little man who'd had to grow up too early because there was no one else to lead his mother down this aisle. They walked slowly on the grass, past Gloria crying, past Jolie crying, over the white petals Lily and Brody had scattered, and reached the end of the aisle where Jace waited beneath the flowers. And Noah stopped, turned to Jace, and the 9-year-old stared straight into the eyes of the man who once abandoned his mother, faked his death, denied his children in front of a restaurant, the man whose photo and letters Noah had torn, and who he'd called a stranger, the man he'd hated with an 8-year-old heart, but was handing his mother to now. And Noah placed Mira's hand into Jace's, gentle but final. Then he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "You break her again, I'll find you. And this time, I won't just tear a photo." Gloria cried harder. Flynn turned his head away. Jolie covered her mouth. And Jace looked at his son, looked into eyes identical to his, eyes that had traveled from hate to worry to trust over a year, not through money or power, but through daily breakfasts and a bandaged hand in the rain. And Jace said, "Deal." Lily and Brody started scattering the last of the petals as they walked back to their seats, and Brody tripped on the edge of a chair, almost fell, the flower basket tipping, and Lily spun around, grabbed the 6-year-old's hand, pulled him upright, brushed grass from his knee, and said, "Come on, little brother, I got you." And Brody grinned, held her hand, and they kept walking. One a blood child, one adopted, but both family, because family isn't defined by DNA. It's defined by who holds your hand when you fall. Jace Valetti once ruled half of Chicago through fear. Once believed power was the only thing that kept a man standing. But he learned the only thing worth keeping in this life isn't in a safe or on a street corner, it's in the small hand gripping his finger. Mira Donovan never needed an angel. She needed a man. Imperfect, scarred, wounded, but present. And sometimes being present is the hardest thing anyone can do. Their story teaches us that truth hurts at first, but it's the only thing that can truly heal. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to face it after being afraid for 8 years. That family isn't what you're born into. It's what you choose to build, day by day, breakfast by breakfast, hand in hand under the rain. If this story touched your heart, please hit like, share this video with someone you think needs to hear it today, and subscribe to our channel so every day you'll have a new story worth listening to. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever witnessed or lived through a moment where the truth changed everything? Where a single decision redirected an entire life? Write your thoughts in the comments below. We read every comment, and we want to hear what comes from deep in your heart. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you and your family good health, joy, peace, and a life full of love every day. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.